You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
This episode is brought to you by Nerds Gummy Clusters, the sweet treat that always elevates the vibe. With a sweet gummy surrounded with tangy, crunchy nerds, every bite of Nerds Gummy Clusters brings you a whole new world of flavor. Whether it's game night, on the way to a concert, or kicking back with your crew, unleash your senses with Nerds Gummy Clusters.
Now streaming on Peacock.
By all that's holy, Bridget Jones.
Hello, old friend.
Bridget Jones is back
We are about to embark on an adventure.
for one final chapter.
Anything else I can help with?
Yes.
Experience every moment
Do you think about what might have been?
and fall in love
To Bridget.
all over again.
It's time to live.
Bridget Jones, Mad About the Boy. Streaming now only on Peacock.
How about we go into the practice space with just drums and bass, and we'll start playing and you start singing.
Welcome to another new episode of Live Through That. I'm your host, Mike Hipple, and on this podcast, we'll dig a little deeper into a pivotal moment into the lives of some of my favorite artists from the 80s and 90s. So this week we have Carrie Akre on the show. She fronted two amazing bands from 90s Seattle, Hammerbox and later Goodness. They were legendary if you were in the know. They were always on the precipice of something big, but they never quite got to Pearl Jam status. One of the main reasons why the band is so beloved is because of Carrie's remarkable voice and stage presence. Both bands should have been way bigger than they were, and it's worth digging out their records. They're out there on the streaming service of your choice. Today, Carrie is still out there creating music and art and shares with us the story of how she discovered her voice by way of a stint in France.
So I grew up in mostly Kennewick, Washington, which is a part of the Tri-Cities. At the time I was there, it was small enough. So I think each of the cities had about 30,000 people in them. But it's Eastern Washington State and considered pretty small, definitely very red, which a lot of us felt growing up doing that, especially if you were a punk rocker or into anything alternative. And so for me, I think I knew very early on that I wanted to see more of the world. I was much more curious and open-minded about things and was just planning my escape. So come graduation time, I made my way to Seattle via University of Washington. So I went to the University of Washington and was just so excited to get to Seattle. My goal was Seattle. I think college was secondary. And so while I was there, my emphasis was photography and art, but also had been an avid student of French. I'd always been attracted to going to France for some reason. I was a terrible student, but at some point, the University of Washington offered a quarter over in France, and so I signed up to do that. And I spent a quarter in Nantes, which is in Normandy, with the University of Washington. But the whole time I had planned to stay because my goal was to learn to speak French. I knew I was a terrible student. I knew I'd have to immerse myself and be forced. And so I got a job as a nanny, or a jeune fille au pair, as they call it over there, and spent the rest of the year in France and at times traveling around. And it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. For anyone who doesn't speak English as a first language, I have deep sympathy, understanding what it's like to not have language to navigate, to defend yourself, to define your personality, to make friends. It's a real stripping of who you are as a person if you're doing it later. I think kids have a much easier time, not only learning, but just navigating between the two. But I really felt that when I was over there. I deeply felt the absence of my ability to communicate, not only just information, but again, like navigate people in the world and define who I am as a personality. So I had real sympathy for that. But when I got back, I just went back to college, but also just had this idea of like, well, if you could do that, what else have you always wanted to do? And I have always been involved in singing. I am really a singer. I started in choir when I was very young. And in the Tri Cities, I think that's really what you had was choir. And I had some incredible teachers who pushed myself to like do competitions, things in other languages. They were fascinating to be around. They had us do difficult pieces and things like that. And, I love that. I think I love the push. I used to spend most of my alone time either listening to music or I would wait till my whole family left. And then I would put on records like Barbra Streisand, like Songbird, and, just very fascinated with voice, all kinds of voices, but, to learn like, how do they get that tone? How does she hold that note that long? Or anyone, right? Like, how did they sing like that? Pat Benatar or Elizabeth Fraser, Cocteau Twins, like they're just some great singers. Chrissy Hind, tone, like just different sounds. So I spent years and years just listening and singing along to records before I ever got to Seattle and made my way into bands. And so back to that story, I at some point decided, well, I've never been in a band, and really simply just decided, okay, I'll try and be in a band. And anyone who knows me knows I'm fairly woo. I'm a deep believer in synchronicity and law of attraction to some extent. Or just ignorance was bliss at that time, and it works in your favor because you're not thinking anything against the possibilities. And so Seattle had a pretty obvious scene to me. I made friends there who'd been there much longer, but you could already see posters, places to see shows, other musicians. Just you could throw a rock and meet another musician, even at that time before I'd even joined. So it just seemed like, oh, there's places I could go figure out how to do this. And my first move was to look at the ads in the back of the music periodical that was called The Rocket, which is dedicated to music. And in the back of it, it had ads. And so I just, without knowing any better, was like, well, I'll start looking there. And I answered one ad, and it was the ad that Dave and James, who would later become the drummer and bass player for my first band, Hammerbox, it was the ad they had put in, The Rocket. And what caught my eye was the mentioning of Annie Lennox and influences. They had like Husker Du and a whole range of REM, other examples of influences or who they were loving for music. And Annie Lennox showed up, and I was like, ooh, I could do that. Like, because I was a huge Eurythmics fan. So I called the ad, and it was so funny because surprisingly, I'm very adverse to risk once I get going. Like, I will just cold call, but I am not an Uber planner or controller. So when I got on the call, Dave in particular was kind of grilling me about, well, do you have a recording? Do you have, songs you've written or other things like that? And my list was like, nope, nope, nope. I don't have any of that. You're just going to have to let me come over. And they did. One of the things I laugh about all the time was, as a female looking back, I go, what was I thinking? Am I going to get on the bus and go to what was then no man's land, like Greenwood, the Greenwood neighborhood, which is definitely north of downtown, to these two guys' house. Like, I can't believe I was like, yeah, that's cool. But I did. I went over to the house that they were living in and practicing in, met both of them, and just had a good initial conversation, probably about influences and my background singing. And then Dave says, well, we've started to write a couple songs. How about we go into the practice space with just drums and bass, and we'll start playing and you start singing. And I go tell you, I've never played in a band. I've never gotten on a mic like that. I mean, zero. But for whatever reason, I am very good under pressure. I get very pragmatic and like, well, this is it. It's like green light, go. So they started playing and I started singing, and things started coming out of me, melodies and words of sorts. And I just jumped in, and I don't know why, but immediately clicked for me as a free space to just, do whatever comes to you. And that was my initiation into a band format. And they took a couple days and said, like, okay, you're in. Then, funny enough, again, along the lines of synchronicity, I was living downtown in this loft space that happened to be actually the old space Charles Peterson, the famous photographer, lived in. There was a dark room in the loft space that he had built, which was great because I was still a photography student. And below me lived Nils Bernstein, who was a well known Seattleite who had his own record stores, but who went on to become the VP of publicity for Sub Pop. Roderick Wolgamott from Sky Cries Mary, who I knew from college. You'll see Seattle's a very small town as I keep talking. I knew Roderick from the UW, and he had just started doing Sky Cries Mary and had completed. Actually, I'll go back farther. I met up with Roderick in France because he had ended up going to the Jacques Lecoq Mime School. Hello, he's so artistic. He was taking acting and he was in the theater program and then decided to go to mime school in Paris. Had completed the Grinder Cease record, first Sky Cries Mary collaboration with the guys from the Posies at the time. And he had shopped it in Paris and I believe got a deal with New Rose Records. And he and I hung out in France, like in Normandy in the south of France, for a little bit. So back to Seattle, Roderick had ended up living with Nils. Literally, his room was right below mine, and all I could smell was incense all the time from Roderick's room. But they had a friend, Jeff Hayward, who I was talking to, and I was telling him about forming a band, and he said to me, "Hey, I have a friend from Eugene, Oregon. He's an amazing guitar player. You should meet him." And that was Harris. And so I said, great, because I wouldn't know anything better. So I was like, sure. And Harris came up and tried out. And Harris is a uniquely extraordinary guitar player. He's got such a signature style. And I loved it right away. And so did the rest of the guys. And we said, you're in. And boom, we formed the band. We didn't have the name yet. And we started, as you do in a band, you start getting together and writing. And frankly, for us getting to know each other, think about it, none of us knew each other. I think Dave and James kind of knew each other a little more, although they were from Tennessee and Kentucky. But we just started writing. And I think one of our first songs was that we never put out, but it's somewhere on recording, was a song we ended up calling Down in the Hammerbox. And when we were trying to come up with names, I think, we had said like, oh, what about Hammerbox? And we all liked it and kept it. So that's how we formed and that's how we got the name.
Was it the experience in France that gave her the confidence to front a band?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Because you'll compare back, like, is this hard? Well, think about that thing. Yeah. I mean, I had a winter over there where this is pre-internet. So remember, I had a friend in London going to school. We were going to meet up for Christmas. She had sent me a letter and I was like, great, I'll meet you at this date in London. Took off. She apparently had sent me another letter that missed me saying I won't be there. So I got to London at the university she was going to. They were like, oh, she went home. Sorry. And at that point, when you're traveling, and this happens for everybody, things happen. You know what I mean? And you just got to figure it out. So you get well versed in the grace of people and the support of people. It's another place things are magical, I feel like. I don't fear that I won't be figuring it out or taken care of somehow. Like it'll work itself out, So I stayed with whoever was there. Had to get my visa updated anyway. Did that. So you're just having to figure things out. So there's no choice. And that helped a lot. I ran out of money in London and had to beg for money. And so you really learn how giving the world can be or not, depending on the person. I got myself back to Nantes. And so I think the scrappiness of that, like I can figure it out, or in the world, there's ways to figure things out, I got well versed in.
Carrie has such a powerful and distinctive voice. I was wondering if she always knew she possessed such a gift.
I knew I could sing. But I think at that time I knew I could sing along to things and sound good. I mean, that's the extent of my knowledge. I can sing with Barbara Streisand, right? Am I her? Hell no. Or I could mimic well. If I put my mind to it, like Chrissy Hind or Pat Benatar, I would say I wasn't thinking like that. I was more like, I was very curious, very interested in enjoying singing along. Like I was more in the being interested phase, like curious, like, oh, what does that sound like? Or how could I get my voice to sound like that? But that's the extent of my thinking, was just enjoying listening and mimicking. And that never translated into, oh, you could do that, or you should think about being that. Again, the Tri-Cities is very small, so anything big felt very far away to me, like LA, or not Seattle so much. We had family in Seattle, but big things felt far away in my mind. The world was, I was living mostly in my imagination and just enjoying, you know, listening.
Earlier, we heard Carrie mention that she thinks of herself as more introverted. That doesn't necessarily come across in her voice or stage presence, and I wanted to understand that a little more.
I deeply crave adventure, and I'm very curious. I honestly think I'm born that way. Like I want to travel, I want to see things, and you can do that from a very introverted state, right? Like I can, but I'm just driven for adventure and curiosity, I guess. And once I've decided I want that, there's kind of no getting in the way, but that's a very alone, that's a process I do very alone in my own head, right? Like I'm not out and about going, hey everybody, I'm going to France, or hey everybody. I'm just very internal, so I'm alone with myself, being very driven and internal. I also get very driven by the idea of, you got a limited amount of time, what are you doing? You're gonna die one day, like, are you ever gonna go to France? And that'll get me going like that, like.
Hammerbox had come together quickly, they didn't really know each other that well, and then add the pressures of becoming successful very quickly. All of that culminated with the band calling it quits in 1994. I was interested in Carrie's perspective on that.
We're in our early 20s. I was 23 when we started Hammerbox. I think all of it contributed. You've got all of us from very different places, and you're getting to know each other through art. So everybody's got their opinions on their own vision of the art. You've got pressures of the business for sure. I would say it got much heavier when we were signed to A&M Records. I think it brings out the insecurities or the lack of communication skills, passive aggressive behavior, all of which we all had because we were in our 20s. And I think people start to, especially when you're on a major label and you start touring, you get to see like, oh, what this all entails. How do you feel about it? And do you like it? And so any arguments you're having in the band or any of the behavior patterns that you haven't dealt with just get harder. And unless you have the maturity to like sit down and talk about it, I mean, I would say I would say I had a problem. Like I was not good at confrontation or communicating how I feel and why I'm feeling secure in that. I think that was pretty common for anybody our age. In a mature way, I would tend to shut down and be quiet, or just not talk at all because a fear of not knowing how to express my discontent well, like articulate that well, and you get your feelings hurt and all that kind of stuff. So it really, like a lot of bands, it's not unusual, right? All of these things get compounded once you are higher in the arena. And so we had all those issues, and James left first, and God bless James, and RIP, missing him. Also found it difficult probably to demand like his opinion and things like that. So, and he was pretty stubborn, love him, but he was, like, I think we were like, come on, please rejoin the band. And I think he had like pockets of stubborn streak where you just couldn't move him. And then I wanted to start writing full songs. So at the, in Hammerbox, I wrote lyrics and the melody, but Harris and everyone wrote really the songs and song structure. And towards the end, I was like, well, I want to learn how to, I'm starting to want to write full songs. And I think at the time I perceived, right or wrong, that I wasn't, the rest of the band wasn't either going to help with that or weren't receptive to that. And I could have been totally wrong in that perception. But again, was it probably in a highly sensitive state, perceived, yeah, no one's going to help me with this, and was like, I'm out. And what I find amazing is like, we had a 2 record guarantee with A&M Records, which was fairly unheard of. And so I appreciate and can't believe like that. We had a practice and I remember walking out and Harris was like, you're quitting, aren't you? And I was like, yep, I'm out. And just like without that, and never crossed my mind that I wouldn't just start another band, of which I did. I mean, I got reamed by our lawyers and managers. Like they would call and be like, you're ruining everyone's lives and no one gets this chance. And that's another thing that will get me going too, because that pisses me off is when someone's, you know, telling me what to do in some fashion.
That next band was called Goodness, and they released their first record in 1995. Did this feel like more like her band?
Oh, for sure. But I was still learning lessons about ownership. I didn't have like the confidence yet or life lesson enough to go into that. I mean, I started it and I think everyone knew like, oh, Carrie Akre is forming a new band. I think that was very true. But once everybody joined, I kind of acquiesced power to, and we kind of became this democracy, which is not real in bands. It's a false reality that there's democracies. And so, I think I would do it different, probably a little bit, but regardless, like I did get to write full songs and it was great partnering. Danny Newcomb and I were great writing partners, and every band's a learning lesson. And I love the music that we created, and that music and what I wanted, not only for myself to get to write, but like wanted music, I think, that had more space for vocals. I didn't know quite ahead of time what that would look like. We definitely went into the first record wanting to experiment on some level. And one of my experiments was to kind of sing less, like talk sing, like learn how to maybe sing the vocals on certain songs differently than Hammerbox. Hammerbox is such an all out, like huge voice growl, like that style is very different. I went into Goodness wanting to be able to sing different ways and have songs that had more space for the vocals and words and things like that. And, went into another set of experimentation with that band.
All the things that I can't feel. Now here's to the future that seems real. And if you think I'd ever sit here instead of fall less, well, open wide, because this wants to be something real close to me. Happiness, 1, 2, 3, because it's more than this that our eyes can see.
Living in Seattle in the 90s, there were always flyers and ads and displays for Hammerbox and Goodness all over town. I thought they were huge across the country. That was not necessarily the case.
Oh, yeah. You're also, back to the popularity thing. I think this happens with most bands is in your area, you're huge. But once you go on tour and leave like the Northwest, there's a nation, if not a globe, that doesn't know you at all. So it can feel really rough as an experience, like as you go to conquer farther out, like you leave the Northwest and it feels like you're starting over. I mean, I have played many shows to like 0 to 2 people out in the nation with both of those bands. It's humbling, and it's hard work, but at the time, slogging it out on tour was one of the ways, right, you built audience. Songwriting wise, I also think that major labels historically, at least in my time, have always come at the band communicating that they want to grow your career, and that's virtually not true. They want to hit, they need to make money. That's their bottom line, is to make money. And so they may say they love you and know why they're signing you, or they're signing you on the appreciation of what you're currently creating. Their future look is often narrow. The people that are pushing you aren't musicians most of the time, don't have an idea about what would be a hit. They just need to make money. And so that's a really precarious and stressful place to be creating art or pushing someone to make art, right? Like it's a little bit heartbreaking if someone says, "We love your art, now go make something completely different of my choosing," right? So for instance, Goodness was told to go write with writers. Like we wrote with Stan Lynch and a couple other people in the chase of a hit, and that's not uncommon for bands. I would say a lot of bands that have hits, some of those hits are either written with hit makers or mixed to suit whatever radio style is popular. A lot. And so it's disheartening and it's very difficult and it's no guarantee. So it's the things you run into when you go major label. People often, I think, who aren't in bands are like, "Oh, you've made it." And I'm like, "No, you've put your first foot in the door of getting to the place maybe that you make it." And making it is selling millions of records, right? Like that's very far away. Getting signed is not, is just the beginning, and you need a lot in place to navigate that spot. That with these are things I've learned along the way too that I didn't know. Like you need a lawyer, you need a good manager, you need a lot of things in place to navigate and fight in that arena. Things that happen in major labels is, your artist, your A&R rep, artist and representation, signs you and then they're fired. you know Whole regimes change and new leaders come in and they don't know anything about you, nor do they care, so they'll clean house. And things are so different now. I don't even know how new artists are doing it other than like follows and YouTube, and it's a completely different world. But at the time, both of those bands went through all of those pressures. In Goodness, I think the final pressure was we were on Lava Atlantic and they had us record Anthem twice because they didn't like the first time we did it. And I think for them, sometimes a record label will want you to have like a well-known producer on there as part of a selling point. Like, so they'll scrap the whole thing. It was really rough. And then we got done with that. And they literally said to me, they just all of a sudden were like, "We don't care about the band. We just want you." And that was devastating. And the way they said it, the head of that label said it, was so insulting, not to me, but to the rest of my band. And I just, people are very loyal in Seattle, and I am too. You're like family when you have slogged it out like that. And I'm talking slog it out for 5, 6 years. In my mind, my thought was, it was very exciting to have someone say they want you, but his cruelty made me think how easy he was cruel, quickly and easy. I was like, how quickly will you do that to me if you perceive me as a failure? That was my thought. I just thought, this is a false compliment and they'll eat you alive as well. And so I didn't take that opportunity and they dropped us. And, I think Goodness got signed again, but it's a rough road. And then the band, you get tired. We started getting older too. People are getting married, having kids. And that's a pretty common way to like end the
Carrie
thing.
took a break from music and entered the corporate world, moved to Minneapolis, and built a family after Goodness dissolved.
At that point, my life had completely changed. Like I got married, I had a son who was 3. I was working in corporate, so the reason we were there, I got hired by Target.com. I pivoted, I think, after music into technology. Funny enough, like project management, because everybody project managed really in music anyways when you're running a company. Like Garth and I had started Good Ink Records, so I mean, you're constantly organizing and project managing anyway. And at a certain age, I was like, "Oh, I'm broke and I'm getting older. What am I going to do?" So we were in Minneapolis because of Target. And it was a massive change. Like I had gone from being single and in bands to a mother and a wife and working corporate. And so I struggled big time because I love my son and my husband, but it was hard to like go from full freedom to being full of all of this responsibility. And I was the sole breadwinner for the family. So you don't ever really leave your musician mind, but you're not living that life. And that's a hard shift because there's so much freedom in that creativity. And I honestly didn't have the time or energy. I was exhausted. If you, I don't know if you have kids, but like 3-year-olds and a full-time job and we were Minneapolis, we didn't know anyone. I knew places. So funny because bands, I've toured through there a million times. So it was a massive shift in lifestyle for me. I met people at the Current. I met other musicians. My son, we was going to preschool at the Waldorf school, and I think the lead singer of the oh, I'm not going to remember their name. Oh God, I love them. Anyways, like this, a guy I knew who was in a band I really love. Their kid was going there, so I mean, you're always 6 degrees of like somebody. But I used to work in Target, and literally my window looked down on First Ave and the 7th Street station. So it would
Carrie
mess with my
eventually
head a
moved back
little
to the
bit. I'd be like,
Northwest and
oh,
is setting about reclaiming her artistic self.
because my son is older, it's now all about reclaiming my artist self. You're right, because I do have the time and space. So, one thing I learned when I had my son was and tried to do music, I was like, one, music and the developing of a band and songs takes a lot of time. Like we used to practice, Goodness used to practice like 4 times a day, 4 hours at a time. It was crazy. So now I have the space and time, brain space to write. And writing for me is very private. Solo writing is very private. It's my thoughts and journal writing. That's what I've used that art form for, is for personal use, to express myself or sort something out. But I've been doing it long enough too that, I get some of that magic where a song will just come out and either be kind of prophetic sometimes. Music and songwriting has been actually kind of magical and crazy. I've written breakup songs before breakups, like without knowing, or love songs for people. I don't know, like, so there's songs, that I would go back to and be like, oh wow, I'm really talking to myself there. And that's what I love a lot about the art form. But it's always been very private and very personal. I don't collaborate on solo music with pretty much anybody. If it's just my writing, I don't collaborate with anyone because it's personal. And I like to complete my own sentence and find out how I want to write it. I will partner more with musicians when I'm done writing. I've had a different band for every solo record on purpose. I like to gather different people I'm interested in and say, what would you do with this? I'm not controlling when it comes to recording like that. I will tell you no if it's something I don't like. And there's definitely certain instrumentation that I just have no interest in, and like steel pedal or things that are alt country, or it's just not my thing. I could, but I don't want to. Yeah, no, I just feel like a lot of people are doing that. And I'm not interested in that. I'm more interested lately in orchestration, like having strings and things like that. So we shall see. But yeah, I think my comment about I do my best work when nobody's looking. One is about writing's private for me. For a lot of musicians, for a lot of singer songwriters, it's their method of expressing themselves. But I think that comment also was alluding to sometimes you can get whatever you want done when no one cares, right? Like that goes very way back to the era I'm in. That's very DIY, very punk rock. I don't care if the club won't let me in, I'll rent a storefront, right? Like, not it's not I'm not looking to follow rules, I'm not looking for permission. I'll effing go figure out how to do it for myself. And sometimes that's when no one cares, that's when you can get the best shit done. You're like, oh, you don't care, I will go start that then, like. And you need to be a starter that way. Like, I'm not waiting for people to give me permission for anything. Well, I definitely think a large part is for the young. I mean, in terms of the like working your career, doing those things in the beginning, that's a young person's job. I don't want to get in a van. Like, ugh. There's that part of it. But in terms of like musicality and all of that, like you're hitting your stride often in your 40s and 50s, given all of your experiences. That's when you're rich. I feel like my voice is richer than ever, given the decades I've been singing and doing different things. You have so much to say. You know, I was reading Ben Folds' biography, and he was talking about the same thing, that when you hit a certain age, he's like, what am I? And someone had said, well, you're a legacy artist now. Like, you become a legacy thing. Danny and I talk about this. Like, well, what are we now? And I'm like, in some ways we're legacy because we had things during a certain time, but you're also living differently. So I'm not going on tour. I'm not participating in the arena of like music business, but it's not that you don't have a ton of art to create or a lot of things to say. In fact, a lot of my friends have like, that's when they start to continue to learn something new. Danny went from, playing guitar and Shadow and Goodness and all these bands to solo music and singing. You see McCready is starting to sing. Like, you don't stop being creative and having a lot to say. And a lot happens at this age. A lot of stories that other people need to hear. Stories and words and like examples of like, oh yeah, that's very specific to the age. That isn't like, I'm angst ridden, no one's listening and I'm pissed, right? Like now you're writing complete stories that are very exact about certain experiences. And I think you're right. I think people mistakenly don't understand that it's important to have our midlife stories or that they can be represented in a great way. People who I think do that, like Patti Smith, or Tom York from Radiohead. There's plenty of people same age who are continuing, Bjork, are creating incredible art. And you've really honed your craft enough to kind of go even crazier. Like I know enough to be like, I'm going to do whatever I want. Like, and in some ways, maybe this goes back to that quote. It's a great place because nobody's looking. So what do I care? I'm going to go do whatever I want. That's a good thing. I'm not hung up on like, will you like me? Will you notice? Will I sell a lot of records? Am I going to be famous? I'm not hung on any of that. And that's really a great free place to be.
Thank you to Carrie for this amazing chat. And if you're in the Seattle area, she'll be playing a show at the Clockout Lounge on March 8th for National Women's Day. And a quick reminder that you can also buy my book on 80s musicians and where they are today, 80s Redux, and its sequel, Live Through That on 90s Artist, wherever you buy your books. And if you like this show, please leave a review where you're listening. It always helps others find us. And of course, subscribe so that you won't miss an episode. And to take you out today, I'd love to play you a bit of Carrie's latest solo release, a song called Perfect. It's available to listen now wherever you get your music. Thanks for listening.
We may feel like we're sitting down, but both of us know that's not the way that we sound. With all of the things that we've been through, the quiet fight, what we know to be true. I want to tell somebody what we've seen. To any girl who is lost at sea, if you're feeling alone, here's what I want you to know. That you're perfect. You don't have to explain, and you're never too much. That's just something that they say. Don't sit quiet at the table. Don't let them push your hands down. It ain't about the permission. Go ahead and stand your ground. It's okay to say no. It ain't up for debate. Go and finish your sentence. No, it's never too late. Saying how you're feeling. Be as big as you like. And if you feel low, please remember these lines. That you're perfect. You don't have to explain, and you're never too much. That's just something that they say. Don't sit quiet at the table. Don't let them push your hands down. It ain't about the permission.
Do you love it loud? Come to Rockin' Pod Weekend in Nashville. Rock convention featuring panels, interviews, podcasts, signing sessions, vinyl, pop culture collectibles, and more. Over 30 celebrity guests, members of LA Guns, Accept, Kicks, and more. Live concerts, Nashville Rockin' Fest Thursday, Rare Hair on Friday, Tuck Smith and the Restless Hearts Saturday, Punchlines and Backlines All-Star Comedy Show on Sunday. Full details at rockinpod.com.